An old man in a faded uniform shows up at a general's funeral, uninvited, unnoticed, unwanted. Security Officer James Walker sees just another nobody without credentials and blocks him cold. Phones record, whispers spread. But then, a voice cuts through. That's Franklin Hayes. He saved the general's life in '68. They thought he was just an old man. What they didn't know, he was the reason the general ever came home. Stick around, because when a 4-star general halts everything to honor a forgotten hero, the crowd won't be the only ones standing at attention. Justice is about to begin. Share with us your location and what time it is there. We love connecting with our global audience. The morning sun glints off Security Officer James Walker's polished badge as he positions himself at the entrance to General Connor's memorial service. His fingers tighten around the clipboard, a familiar gesture of control he's perfected over 15 years of service. The list of approved attendees feels like armor in his hands, a shield of protocol he wields without mercy. Your name isn't on the list. Security Officer James Walker declares, voice cutting through the respectful murmur of arriving mourners. The elderly man before him, Franklin Hayes, stands perfectly straight in his weathered uniform, a single wilted flower trembling in his grip. Something in the veteran's bearing triggers a flicker of recognition in Walker's military-trained eye, but he squashes it beneath years of rigid procedure. General Connors saved my life in '68. Franklin's voice carries the weight of decades. I just want to pay my respects, sir. Security Officer James Walker's jaw tightens. The word sir from this uninvited guest feels like mockery. Protocol exists for a reason. He snaps, pen scratching harshly against paper as he documents the incident. No credentials, no entry. His badge catches the light again, and he straightens, drawing power from its gleam. Nearby phones rise, recording the confrontation. Security Officer James Walker notices but doesn't flinch. He's the authority here, the guardian of order. Let them record. His righteousness feels bulletproof. Please, Franklin says softly. He would have wanted me here. The quiet dignity in those words sends an unexpected tremor through Security Officer James Walker's certainty. A memory surfaces, his own grandfather telling war stories on the porch, speaking of bonds forged in battle that bureaucracy couldn't comprehend. But protocol is protocol. Step aside or I'll have you removed. Security Officer James Walker threatens, hand instinctively touching his badge. The phones keep recording as Franklin Hayes straightens, even more medals glinting on his chest, their significance suddenly sharp as knives. A voice cuts through the tension. That's Franklin Hayes, General Connor's radio operator from Vietnam, the man who carried him 3 miles to safety under heavy fire. Security Officer James Walker's world tilts. The clipboard suddenly feels heavy with the weight of his mistake. His badge, moments ago, a source of pride, burns against his chest as Tantra Veterans Denied begins trending on social media. Will Security Officer James Walker's dedication to protocol survive this collision with true heroism? Can his authority stand against the tide of public outrage about to break over him? 15 years of following rules, of believing authority flows from regulations rather than respect. But standing here watching Franklin Hayes's quiet dignity in the face of my arrogance, I feel the first cracks in my certainty. When did I stop seeing the humanity behind the protocols? Type respect. If you believe some rules deserve to be broken for the right reasons. The morning sun continues to shine, but Security Officer James Walker's shadow seems smaller, now shrinking beneath the weight of gathering phones and whispered condemnations. His badge, once a shield, now feels like a target as the story begins to spread. Security Officer James Walker stood rigid at his post, the morning sun glinting off his polished badge as he monitored the growing crowd. His radio crackled incessantly with updates about General Connor's funeral procession, but his attention kept drifting back to the elderly man, Franklin Hayes, who remained rooted near the entrance, clutching a wilted flower with trembling fingers. The weight of his badge felt different now, heavier with each passing minute, as whispered conversations reached his ears. That's Franklin Hayes, someone murmured. Served with Connors in '68. James Walker's throat tightened, his earlier words of dismissal echoing uncomfortably in his mind. A memory surfaced, sharp and unbidden. His father, Thomas Walker, sitting in their worn armchair uniform medals catching the lamplight. "Jimmy," he'd said, voice rough with emotion. "In Nam, the real heroes weren't always the ones with the fancy ribbons. Sometimes they were the guys who carried their brothers through hell and never asked for recognition." Security Officer James Walker's hand instinctively touched his badge, the metal cool against his fingertips. The distant drums grew louder, their steady rhythm matching his increasingly troubled heartbeat. His father's words merged with the sight of Hayes's weathered face, creating an uncomfortable knot in his stomach. "All units motorcade approaching in 10. His radio squawked. Security Officer James Walker watched Hayes adjust his grip on the flower, noticed for the first time how the man's jacket sleeve was pinned up where an arm should be. The realization hit him like a physical blow. How many others like Hayes had he turned away thinking he was just following protocol? His tablet pinged with a notification. Someone had posted a video of his earlier confrontation with Hayes. The comments were flooding in, each one a dagger of truth. "This is how we treat our veterans. Shame on Security Officer Walker." The hashtag, Chechubus Respect Our Vets, was gaining traction, and his chest tightened with each new share. "Sir," a junior officer approached, tablet in hand. "You should see this. There's more footage surfacing. Other veterans saying they've been treated the same way at official functions. Policy enforcement over—" She hesitated. Human dignity. Security Officer James Walker's training had always emphasized rigid adherence to protocol. But now, watching Hayes stand there with quiet dignity, he saw the deeper rot beneath the surface. How many times had he hidden behind regulations, using them as a shield against his own conscience? The drums were almost deafening now. Security Officer James Walker's father had died 3 years ago, his own service largely unrecognized. The parallel struck him hard. Hayes could have been his father, standing there with a simple flower and a lifetime of service being told he didn't belong. Research papers and veteran advocacy reports filled his tablet screen. Systematic exclusion of veterans from memorial services. The title of one study jumped out at him. The statistics were damning, thousands of veterans blocked from paying respects, all in the name of security protocols. Have you ever felt the weight of a wrong choice crushing your chest? Share your story below. Security. With humanity. Security Officer James Walker's badge caught the light again, but now it seemed to mock him. The symbol of authority he'd worn with such pride felt like a brand of shame. His father's voice echoed again. "Sometimes, son, the biggest mistake is following orders without questioning why." The motorcade was visible now, a slow-moving line of black vehicles approaching the cemetery gates. Security Officer James Walker stood frozen between duty and conscience, his carefully constructed world of rules and regulations crumbling around him. The problem wasn't just this moment. It was years of rigid thinking of valuing procedure over people. Hayes shifted slightly, his good arm cradling the flower like a precious thing. The old veteran's quiet dignity spoke volumes about the kind of strength that couldn't be measured by rank or captured in regulations. Security Officer James Walker felt the full weight of his role in a system that had forgotten the very people it was meant to honor. His radio crackled again with final motorcade positions. But Security Officer James Walker could only hear his father's words, mixing with the drum beats and the whispers of the crowd, all asking the same question. When did we start confusing control for respect? Type legacy if you've ever had to choose between what's right and what's required. Security Officer James Walker paces the funeral home's corridor, his polished shoes echoing against marble floors like accusations. The weight of his badge, once a source of pride, now burns against his chest as his phone buzzes incessantly with notifications. The media footage of his confrontation with Franklin Hayes has exploded online, and each replay feels like another nail in his professional coffin. Through the window, Security Officer James Walker watches General Price's motorcade approach. But instead of the usual surge of importance he feels when managing high-profile arrivals, his stomach churns. The revelation about Hayes's heroism at Khe Sanh haunts every thought. "He saved them both," whispers through his mind, each word a hammer striking his carefully constructed wall of authority. Security Officer James Walker's hands tremble as he adjusts his tie, catching his reflection in the window. The same face that hours ago sneered at Franklin Hayes now looks hollow, uncertain. Outside, reporters gather like vultures, their camera lenses glinting in the afternoon sun. His phone vibrates again. Another notification about Akshan unspoken heroes trending nationwide. "Sir." A junior officer approaches, tablet in hand. "The footage. It's on every major network." Security Officer James Walker watches the screen, seeing himself through others' eyes for the first time. His dismissive gestures, the cold authority in his voice, the way Hayes stood with quiet dignity. It all looks different now. Smaller, meaner, the badge weighs heavier with each passing moment. Security Officer James Walker touches it, remembering how he'd used it to intimidate Hayes. Now it feels like a brand marking his shame. The clicking of camera shutters intensifies outside, and he knows they're not here to document the funeral anymore. They're here for him, for this story of power misused and dignity denied. His radio crackles with updates about General Price's imminent arrival, but Security Officer James Walker can barely focus. The revelation about Hayes's role in saving both Price and Connors has stripped away every justification, every protocol he'd hidden behind. The clipboard in his hands, once his shield of authority, now feels like evidence of his failure to see the human being behind the security threat. A news van pulls up outside its satellite dish, reaching toward the sky like an accusing finger. Security Officer James Walker watches as his world begins to crumble, not with a bang, but with the soft whisper of truth finally being heard. His phone shows the hashtag spreading, "Unspoken." Heroes has reached over 1 million shares, each one carrying the story of his confrontation with a true hero. The same corridors he'd patrolled with such authority now feel like a maze closing in. Security Officer James Walker realizes that in trying to protect order, he'd become the very thing he was supposed to guard against. A barrier between right and wrong, between honor and empty ceremony. Have you ever watched someone's world collapse in real-time drop one to show respect for the true heroes among us? Through the glass doors, he sees Franklin Hayes arriving with General Price, both men walking with the quiet dignity of those who've faced real battles. Security Officer James Walker's clipboard slips from his nerveless fingers, the sound of it hitting the floor, lost beneath the roar of his own shame. His authority, once absolute within these walls, dissolves with each new share, each retweet, each news report revealing Hayes's history. Security Officer James Walker stands frozen, watching his carefully constructed world of rules and regulations shatter against the unyielding truth of real heroism. The badge that had given him such power now feels like a weight pulling him under. As camera crews position themselves near the entrance, Security Officer James Walker faces the ultimate realization he hadn't been protecting anything. He'd been standing in the way of everything that truly mattered. Security Officer James Walker's boots scrape against the pavement each step, a thundering reminder of 15 years of unwavering protocol now shattering like glass. The weight of the badge, that gleaming symbol of authority he'd polished every morning, suddenly feels like lead against his chest. Around him, the funeral crowd holds its collective breath, smartphones raised, documenting his internal war. "Stand down," a colleague whispers urgently from behind, but James Walker's mind replays Franklin Hayes's words about serving alongside General Connors in Kuwait. The veteran's weathered face, the trembling hand clutching that single white rose, It all crashes through James Walker's carefully constructed walls of regulations and procedures. His fingers move to his badge, the metal warm from years pressed against his heart. For the first time since his academy graduation, James Walker unpins it, the click echoing across the suddenly silent gathering. The world seems to slow as he tucks it into his pocket, each movement deliberate, captured by dozens of cameras. "Sir!" James Walker calls out to Hayes, his voice carrying an unfamiliar gentleness that surprises even himself. "Allow me." The veterans gathered near Hayes watch with widening eyes as James Walker, the infamous stickler for rules, approaches with extended hands. His earpiece crackles with commands to maintain protocol, but James Walker's focus remains on Hayes's eyes that have seen the same battles as General Connor's eyes that deserve more than being blocked by bureaucracy. The rose trembles in Hayes's grip as James Walker reaches for it. "I served with Connor for 20 years, Hayes whispers, his voice breaking. 20 years. James Walker's throat tightens. "Then let me help you honor him, sir." The "sir" falls from his lips naturally, now no longer the mechanical address of a security officer, but the genuine respect of one human to another. Social media explodes. Protocol breaker trends within minutes, accompanied by videos of the moment. James Walker catches glimpses of the headlines forming on people's phones: "Security officer breaks protocol for veterans' honor," and "Humanity trumps rules at general's funeral." Totum. To what it type honor if this moment moved you. General Price approaches, but instead of the reprimand James Walker expects, there's understanding in the senior officer's eyes. Together they escort Hayes to the front, the veteran between them, his step stronger, now dignity restored. James Walker's hand finds his empty badge spot, a gesture caught in countless photographs that will circle the globe. The absence feels right. A void filled with something far more valuable than authority, humanity. Later, as the sun sets over the cemetery, James Walker stands alone by the gates. His phone buzzes constantly with notifications, the story viral now, but his mind is on Hayes's parting words. "You reminded me what we fought for, son. Not rules, people." A final camera flash captures James Walker's silhouette against the dying light, his uniform complete, except for the missing badge. Tomorrow there will be consequences reports to file, superiors to face. But tonight, for the first time in his career, James Walker feels like he truly served and protected. 3. Share this if you believe sometimes breaking protocol is the highest form of service. Protocol breaker. His badge remains in his pocket, but James Walker stands taller than ever before, finally understanding that true authority comes not from metal pins and rigid rules, but from the courage to see the human behind every regulation. Security Officer James Walker stands rigid in his freshly pressed uniform, the morning sun catching his polished badge, not as a symbol of authority now, but as a reminder of transformation. The same badge that once felt like a shield of absolute power now weighs differently against my chest, humble and heavy with purpose. The Franklin Hayes Veterans Center rises before me, its new brick facade warm in the dawn light. My fingers trace the edge of my badge, remembering how just 24 hours ago I'd clutched it like a weapon at General Connor's funeral. Now, watching Franklin Hayes approach the ribbon with scissors in hand, I feel the final pieces of my old self crumbling away. The true measure of authority, I whisper to myself, the words catching in my throat, isn't in how firmly you can hold on to power, but in knowing when to let it go. The wilted flower from the funeral, now preserved and framed in the center's lobby, catches my eye. Its dried petals tell a story of humility I'd spent years refusing to hear. The crowd's applause washes over me as Hayes cuts the ribbon, his hands steady, just as they were when he'd stood his ground against my protocols. He still carries himself with that quiet dignity that had first challenged my rigid worldview. I watch him try to deflect the attention, and in his modesty I see everything I wasn't, everything I'm learning to be. My clipboard, that symbol of rules and regulations I'd wielded so righteously, hangs in my office now. Not as a trophy, but as a testament to my awakening. Sometimes I address the gathered crowd, my voice carrying a new kind of authority. Our greatest service comes not from enforcing rules, but from having the courage to recognize when those rules need to change. The veterans in attendance, men and women who'd given so much more than I'd ever understood, nod in silent acknowledgement. My eyes meet Hayes's, and I see in them not the defiance I'd once perceived, but the wisdom I'd been too blind to recognize. I stand before you today not as Security Officer James Walker, who demands respect. I continue feeling the weight of every word, but as James Walker who has learned to earn it. This center represents more than a building. It represents the triumph of compassion over protocol, of wisdom over power. The preserved flower catches the light, its dried petals casting delicate shadows on the wall. Like that flower, I too had to wilt before I could be preserved in a new form. The sound of veterans' canes tapping against the floor creates a gentle rhythm, a heartbeat for this new chapter. I reach up and adjust my badge one last time, feeling its familiar weight with new understanding. In the reflection of the center's windows, I see myself, not the unyielding enforcer of yesterday, but someone who's finally learned that true authority blooms from wisdom, not force. As Hayes approaches me after the ceremony, his hand extended, I feel the last vestiges of my old pride dissolve into something better. Humility. Thank you, I say, meaning it more than any words I've ever spoken, for teaching me what real service looks like. The hashtag Warchers Quiet Heroes flashes on phones throughout the crowd, but Hayes just smiles that same modest smile. And I understand now, true heroes don't need to announce themselves. They simply serve quietly, changing the world, one small act of courage at a time. Type if you believe in the power of transformation, and share this story to remind others that it's never too late to learn what real heroism means. The preserved flower, my reformed badge, and that humble clipboard now stand as silent witnesses to this truth. Sometimes the greatest authority comes from knowing when to step aside, when to listen, and when to let wisdom bloom in the garden of change.